Merci beaucoup d'être dans la salle et en ligne. Nous sommes très heureux d'accueillir la professeure Felicitas Hillmann ici à Québec, à l'Université Laval. Donc, c'est un séminaire qui est présenté à vous par la chaire sur les dynamiques migratoires mondiales de Daniel Bélanger, qui est ici, et par l'équipe de recherche sur l'immigration au Québec et ailleurs, l'ÉRIQA, dont je suis la co-directrice ici à l'Université Laval, aussi avec Catherine Ardé et Mireille Paquette. Donc, merci beaucoup de nous avoir rejoints dans la salle et en ligne. Donc, ce webinaire va se dérouler en anglais, mais je vais faire une brève présentation de la professeure Felicitas Hillmann, qui ensuite vous présentera son sujet et de quoi elle va parler aujourd'hui. Parfait. Alors, on est très heureux de la recevoir depuis Berlin, ici à Québec. Felicitas Hillmann est géographe. Elle a fait une maîtrise en géographie à l'Université de Gênes et en études italiennes, et ensuite une thèse de doctorat à l'Université de Fribourg en Allemagne. Elle a eu différents postes à l'Université libre de Berlin, l'Université technique de Berlin où elle est maintenant, et aussi à Düsseldorf. Elle travaille sur les villes et les migrations, la migration qualifiée en contexte urbain, l'immigration et le changement environnemental, l'immigration et genre, entre autres. Elle a écrit une dizaine de livres dont est publié, dirigé d'une dizaine de livres, dont un dernier livre qui vient de sortir avec Michael Summers qui s'appelle Cities, Migration and Governance Beyond Scales and Levels, qui est sorti chez Routledge en 2023, que j'espère vous pouvez voir le petit écran. Et je vais maintenant la laisser nous faire une présentation qui va durer à peu près 40 minutes. Nous sommes en mode webinaire, ça veut dire que si vous voulez vous poser des questions, merci de mettre les questions dans le chat et on les relaiera nous à l'oral dans la salle. Voilà, ça c'est juste pour ça. C'est pour ça que vous ne pouvez pas intervenir en personne, mais vous pouvez intervenir par webinaire. Merci beaucoup.
Alors, merci beaucoup. Hein. Je suis très heureuse d'être ici. C'est la première fois à Québec et j'aime être à l'Institut de géographie et migration mondiale. Très bon. But now I switch to English because my French is a bit rusty.
Apparently, we only see it with the notes. So can you put it in big more?
Yeah.
Okay, so we just have to get out.
We are online now.
Yeah, no. I mean the slides. Apparently, if we want to see them, we have
just go ahead. Okay, I'm very pleased to be here, and we just start with I just start with why we do this lecture, and I'm basically traveling for Canada to look after what you're doing here in Canada in terms of migration and integration, and to have a bit more exchange between Germany and Canada maybe in the future. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I prepared for you a talk on the arrival of refugees to Germany and what does it mean for cities. And I speak of cities or of that governance beyond scales and levels, I have to say, because I think this is the task we have to follow in the next years. So my talk is structured like this. I first will speak about how cities deal with migration, the arrival and integration of the Ukrainian refugees in the urban texture in Germany. So it's on Germany's cities and the immigration from Ukraine. I will then turn to a bit of theory. Why do we see that urban transformation and what does it has to do with migration? So I call this beyond scales and levels. And then the third part of my presentation is on the making of the whole thing. So how is it? How do become mayors local bureaucrats and why? And here we'll refer to the example of Brandenburg, which is the county around Berlin and has been or is part of the former GDR setting, which is totally different or very different to what we have in Western Germany. And it's an exciting example because you had a very low share of immigration in those small and medium-sized cities. And it's exciting to see what the mayors say about the changes in their cities with the Syrian refugees. So I think it relates to what we see today, the Ukrainians, because it was some sort of training field, you could say, for what is happening now. I'll start with my first slide, and that is the first point, which is not moving here. No, now it is. Okay, thank you. The arrival of Ukrainian refugees in Germany. Which facts do we have? What do we know? I'm sorry, it's okay. it's not going back here. It's very slow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is, here we go. I apologize.
It's my computer.
Just click once and wait.
Yeah, just-
Yeah, we wait a moment. So what is happening since Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine in February 2 years ago, we can say that has provoked the largest refugee migration in Europe since the end of World War II. We have to be aware of that. And Germany and Canada face quite different situations, different numbers also. So the refugees arriving in Canada is only 20% of all migrants. If we look on refugees under the QAD, it's about 200,000 persons arriving. If we look on Germany, we have refugees making up 90% of all migrants coming to Germany. And we speak about slightly different numbers. So you can see that on the right side, the chart, you can
People
see.
can see it. That's right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Why this is a
So this is making me a bit nervous to put off my jacket.
Si le voit comme ça, on peut laisser comme ça.
Oui, sinon on va le laisser comme ça. Mais tu vois ce que ça fait là, ça.
Ouais, ça mélange pas. Ah, c'est pas un Wi-Fi.
Non, ça devrait. Sorry, we are having a little bit of a technical issue with
Okay.
the slides.
No worries.
All right. Okay.
Now you can see it. Okay,
I think so.
That's
Yeah,
great. But
I'm
you
gonna-
can see
yeah.
everything now. Maybe we should.
Yeah, maybe we'll stay like this.
Maybe we can put it on the big screen here, on the full screen.
It seems like.
It's not working with the full screen.
Yeah, it seems that it's
Okay, so we stay to the small screen then, and you can see here anyway, just focus on the big slide here. You can see that the number of refugees arriving in Germany has increased, and we speak about 800,000 already in 22, and of course we have more people now in Germany. Both countries, and that's the small comparison I want to do here, have reacted with very different approaches and support schemes, and they differ in their social policy responses. And what is important, and we learned that in our webinar we had a month ago, that it is important to look on the strategies and trajectories of the migrants themselves. Adela was speaking about the different mindset. I think that is very important. So once you go or you come to Canada, you decided to stay here. While as long as you're in Germany, you're in the neighboring country somewhat. And it makes a big difference because you think of going back maybe or not. So your whole thinking is different, the mindset. And we need that, we need to keep in mind that. So this is a bit about the numbers. And, oh, that's confusing because, anyway. Yeah, do we have to do that manually? Maybe go to the, I can see it here.
I know, this is really weird. Maybe I just doesn't use.
Yeah, should we use my computer?
That's. I'm just gonna stop sharing the chat.
Okay, that's perfect. So what can we say about the whole migration movements from Ukraine? We can say that 1/3 of the 44 million Ukrainians have already left their homes, at least temporarily. So this is a very big dimension. We have about 6 million people that could find protection in European countries. And I just retrieved this very wonderful map, which came out last month. And you can see here that Germany has received a big number of Ukrainian refugees in total. But when you compare it to the size of the population, it's countries such as Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Bulgaria hosting a lot or many Ukrainian refugees. You need to keep in mind that Germany already proceeded 1.15 million applications for asylum a couple of years ago for the Syrian refugees. So, and what Europe did about the Ukrainian refugees was to activate the Temporary Protection Directive. This directive works for a year and then is prolonged or not, because nobody could understand how the situation would develop and nobody was expecting a 2-year war going on. And so this temporary protection directive has been prolonged now to March next year only. I just checked my computer and I found some nice pictures for you. How did it look like when the Ukrainian refugees came to Berlin, especially? And you will see in a moment when the computer switches. You may see. I do not dare to be too rude. Here you can see inside of the main station in Berlin, and that's been a year ago, precisely a year, 2 years ago. I'm sorry. No, we are in February anyway, but nearly. That is intriguing, and you can see here. And so, what did you see outside of the main station? You could see people arriving here, and you can see in the yellow vest, you can see the volunteers. And the volunteers played a very important role in all that processing of the Ukrainian refugees. I just took, and I hope it's coming up now. Yeah, perfect. And what was happening is that there was a tent, a welcome tent, you could say, a welcome center for all those Ukrainian refugees arriving at the main station in that time in March 2 years ago. You can see here again the volunteers with the vests, and you can see people arriving. And you can see that SIM cards have been given to all the Ukrainian refugees. And you can see here also one of the big companies selling mobile phones and stuff. They were also present and helping with everything. So what did the arrival and the integration of the Ukrainian refugees in Germany meant the cornerstones of German policies? So the main point about the temporary protection directive was that it allowed for a fast and uncomplicated reception of the refugees without having to stick to an asylum procedure, which is a lengthy process. And so the quick help was needed here. Germany granted access to people with an Ukrainian passport. So who could come in? People with an Ukrainian passport, stateless people, which were under international protection in the Ukraine. The relatives of the two groups, those who stayed for longer than 90 days in Ukraine and could prove that they were not staying as tourists, but because they couldn't go back to their countries, because there was a big debate on who should be accepted as an Ukrainian refugees. Only the nationals or also people under protection. And the main point about the temporary protection directive was that minimal standards were required and all countries could top up or come up with more services. And Germany did so in a rather generous way, we have to say. So until May 22, the refugees received the same support, financial support, as recognized asylum seekers. And then from June on already, they got access to social welfare. So that is called Bürgergeld. It's money which is transferred to live, a Grundsicherung, 450 euros about per person, plus Kindergeld, which is child benefits and insurance, and all that was covered by federal resources. And that is important to say because the burden then was, or the financial burden was on the federal level and not on the towns and cities. Also, it was decided that the Ukrainian refugees should have immediately access to language training in Germany. So many or the major part of the Ukrainians coming was highly qualified, has a university degree, about 70% of the persons coming. So each person was allowed to have 900 hours of language training. And for some time, this is more some sort of a fun fact, free tickets with the Deutsche Bahn were given to the Ukrainian refugees. So they could move within the country, which was of course important, so they could find their relatives if they had any, and just see where they were staying then. up to today, female Ukrainian refugees outnumber the male refugees. We have more than 60%, 60 to 70% women in this migration movements. That is important to know for you. What about labor market integration? And here I brought you a very interesting map. So we are geographers, so we love the maps. And what you can see here is that North Rhine-Westphalia, the dark blue one, is taking most immigrants from Ukraine. And that makes sense because you have a strong network diaspora there also. And then you have the southern countries or the southern states of Germany, which are more prosperous, and they took up also a large share. But even more interesting, it were the city states which had most Ukrainian refugees per person. So 16.2 persons on 1,000 persons in Bremen, 1,000 inhabitants in Bremen, Hamburg, and Berlin also. So it was the city states which were the places of arrival here. If we look on labor market integration, you can see, and this is the most recent numbers we can get, you can see that in November last year, 170,000 Ukrainians had an employment, which was registered in the social security system, which is important because you get access to all the benefits, also unemployment leave and everything. And 44 Ukrainians were having a mini job, so somehow starting up to get into the labor market also. And the mini job is maybe also for, as we will see in a moment, women who have children and to take care of the children. The employment in total is on the increase. It's slow, but it's coming. So in fall 2022, sorry, there's one number missing. We had 16%. Then in spring, in last year, we already had 19%. And then in summer, we had 23% of people integrated into the labor markets. We still have quite a high share of Ukrainians registered as unemployed. There's an increase also, but there's some movement. And we have, if you look on the integration measures, such as integration courses, we have 124,000 Ukrainians taking part in that measure still. And we have many people who finished that, who have already observed the course. You can see that numbers here. It's a new report we have from Sachverständigenrat, the Council on Migration in Germany. Men are more often in employment than women, we have to say, due to childcare responsibilities, but they are also more often in lower qualified jobs. I have checked for you what happens in the housing market because I know that's a big issue in Canada at the moment, affordability of housing, right? And we have that in Germany too, especially so in the big cities. But it turns out to be not such a big issue. So if you look on that, you can see that most people made it, or Ukrainian people made it to have a private accommodation, a private residence. So they made it into the housing market. And 1/5 had changed the residence. And mainly people stayed where they came to. That is also an interesting fact, I think. And you have only a smaller part which stays still in a refugee camp. And you have some who stay in a hotel or a pension, because in the moment that so many people came, we had to, or Germany had to work, cities had to come up with hotels, pensions to provide people with a place to stay. But that share is rather small, and we have a great support from the Ukrainian friends and family living already in Germany, much more than the state support could offer. That was interesting because you could think of the state providing also housing, but that's not been so much the case. And I want to say we have a high level of support by the resident population from the beginning of the immigration of the Ukrainian refugees. And I brought you this picture because we have, in this moment, we have big demonstrations of millions of people for a Germany which is not xenophobic and not right-wing, as we have in some parts of the country. We have the right-wing party AfD with about 30% of in the polls, and that is of course frightening. And migration is discussed as a burden only. And we have this right-wing tendency also in what happened a couple of weeks ago was that there was a secret meeting and there of this right-wing party, AfD, and the idea of remigration came up, which is a total no-go for, I mean, it was just not thinkable. And it made clear that this right-wing party is deeply anti-democratic and against people living since ever in Germany. So that provoked a whole series of demonstrations. And I wanted to bring you that picture. That's been really, this picture even is a bit older, but it's the type of demonstrations you see at the moment in Germany. So you have some sort of cities changing and people notice that. And this brings me to my part on theory. So why is it that cities become the places where things, where migration is contested so much? And why is it that the cities plays out as a solution for global dynamics such as migration? And I'm saying here not problems, not global problems, but global dynamics, because we have to deal with that. And that can be a chance also, and not only a problem. So, and why don't we see that debate for the nation state? So why is the narrative of the urban, of the local, of the geographical, you can say so powerful? And I think there are good reasons for that. If we look on the whole debate on cities as the concrete, or on the urban as the abstract, or on migration as the abstract, and the migrant as the concrete, you can see three strands of discourse. So in a nutshell that, and this is what we are speaking about also in that wonderful book I just presented to you again, like I was selling something. Anyway, what I want to say, if you look on the notions, what do we speak about? If you speak about the city as territory, as a concrete place, an administrative unit, and most politicians would do so, then you speak about a really restricted version of the city, I would say. So it's often in policy discourse. So you speak about numbers. So why do small cities should cope with high numbers of immigrants? So you reduce it in a way to a very concrete situation. You have a next level in the whole discourse, which sees the urban as an abstract notion. So, for example, made out of dense structures and nodes and networks, as Manuel Castel would say. So more abstract. And here you get into a more academic discourse, which sometimes is so critical that it denies concrete constraints cities have, of course. So this is some sort of conflicting narration within the debate on the urban, on cities. And you have a third strand of theory, of thinking, which sees diversity as a main characteristic of the urban, which is produced by migrants and migration. And that is interesting also, because here in this literature, the market side of the thing is pronounced. So diversity is the selling point for the city, and its marketization, its commodification, and all these three strands of thinking we listen to. And when you read about migration and the cities, you do not know who is speaking then. So it's creating some sort of cacophony, I would say, chaos a bit. And why is it that we see that different notions of the cities? I think we can speak of three different approaches towards migration, which happily coexist, but which have had their time. So the first, I want to show you the first stage we see was the traditional functioning of cities, of sorting and organizing migration and migrants. And the next stage was somewhat an accelerated globalization. So cities had to fit into the International Division of Labor. And this is a point where things change for migration. And we are now, and that's what I want to show, in the transformative phase. So we don't know precisely what's coming from the top-down governance, government side. And we have strongly the bottom-up situation. And we see some sort of a black box of social innovation driven by migration, I would say so. So this black box is very interesting. And I want to speak quickly about those different happily coexisting approaches of cities, because I think it's important to understand that. The first one is about sorting via social infrastructure. So if we think of cities sorting migration, they do so because they need to internally organize themselves as an administrative unit who is doing what work. And that's what we see in each period of socioeconomic restructuring. I think we are still in such a period, be it industrialization or globalization. Cities tend to attract more and more differentiated types of migration and mobilities. And they do so by renewing, for example, their hardware, we could say. So stations, terminals, places of first arrival. You can see that in Europe at the moment. So we are renewing our high-speed transport system, for example. I'm not sure about Canada, but that is a very good sign that mobilities are changing. And so here the city seeks to set up the migration infrastructures and also to bring foreigners or migrants, whatever, into specific neighborhoods. We could see that very clearly. It's one form of organizing if you concentrate people in certain neighborhoods. And very often urban policies were built only in the aftermath of that. So when diseases came up or great poverty arises, so then urban policies started to act. So that was a reaction. It was not a proactive thing, but it's a reaction. And the reaction comes because there's a danger for the rest of the city. So it was not really looking after the migrants or migration, but to protect the others from the dangers of migration. So this sorting is somewhat egocentric. We see such organic forms of uncontrolled growth of cities still in many cities of the global south, if you think of it, where people come in and you have marginalized places, neighborhoods in the cities. So it is the urban context that absorbs the newcomers and later the families. So the city has to come up with, the city administration has to come up with housing, schooling, educational infrastructure, and healthcare, of course, but also offers to spend leisure time. So just to have some form of control. So cities had to provide that support systems in one way or the other, and they still have to. So this is what I mean by sorting and organizing. And it looks on the internal city. Of course, often problems of community cohesion do arise because more people come in, because there's a fight for housing, and that has to be resolved. But the important point is here you speak about social policies and social infrastructure. And that changed when with the next stage, I will come to that, when the worldwide, the International Division of Labor was changing. So we have very strong neoliberalism coming up, and still cities were reacting on migration, but in a different way. They discovered that they needed certain types of migration and mobility to position themselves better in this global hierarchies. I mean, it's mainly the thinking of Saskia Sassen here, but it's very true because you have so big changes in the economies. So the restructuring, You have transnational cooperation stepping up in certain cities. In the need of highly qualified workers, you have this expansion of the university sector, bringing in international students, which are sort of resourceful migrants. And here, for the first time, migration becomes the driver of urban regeneration on one side. On the other side, you have all this, you could say, service personnel of the globalization, like you need helpers in your households, you need all sorts of services to keep the economy going. So, and you have a big share of people who just dropped out of the labor market because they had been hired to do the industrial work, and they just get unemployed, and they were very often migrants. So you have internally increasing socioeconomic polarization, and towards the outside, cities seek to position themselves. And that's interesting because now the role of the mayor changes. It's no longer the head of the administration of a city who has to deal with the internal sorting, but he or she is the person stepping up and positioning the city towards the outside. And cities had to become iconic, they had to marketize themselves, profile, city marketing, all that starts now. And here migration is important because it allows you to be some form of international interesting. You have all these tourist spots which have been neighborhoods with a high percentage of migrants. So all that changes. So the cities become sites for economic development. They start cherishing diversity and they disregard social policies. So we know that with these ideas of neoliberalization, we have less social policies. So this whole idea of sorting and organizing internally is left to the person, to the individuals. So that's an interesting trend. And then we are now in this third stage, which was the black one I showed you. And that is interesting because what happened in the background, this transformative stage, and the speaking about the urban and migration now starts precisely, or more or less precisely, we did a little research on that, when the Sustainable Development Goals came up. And if you look on the Millennium Development Goals, there was nothing about migration in that. So, but now migration is in a way seen as some driving force for whatsoever at that moment. And you have, of course, the Global Compact coming up a bit later. And what happens is that two big silos start speaking to each other. One is the silo of migration researchers who never looked at the local space, but now start doing so. And on the other hand, also the urban researchers or the urban researchers did not look on migration as a topic for their cities. So those two silos start speaking to each other because now the place, the cities become the hope for the implementation for the SDGs. And all this feeds into the discourse on migration and governance very quickly, because what plops up now is a network of NGOs, of global actors, and you never understand who is driving that. So you have this whole network of NGOs, of semi-NGOs, of states, of cities, which connect, which get into transnational circuits. And that came up in that time only. So what I'm saying is we see ourselves in this transformative moment. And this means you have the implementation of the SDGs. There's a hope on cities to be the place of implementation, to act. And you have transnational city networks gaining power and using global topics such as climate change and migration to negotiate their position within the international network. And that is new. So implementing local policies, top down, of course, and then you hear about bilateral exchange. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of bilateral exchange. That's why I'm here. And you hear about best practices, who is doing what, and how could we do that better? We have NGOs, and you have certain narratives which come back frequently, and they all speak of sustainability and resilience, and so it's a bit different to the discourse we hear from bottom up. So you have many cities in which now the population is often a migrant population, and that cities become more proactive. So there it's no longer reactive, it's really proactive. So they would claim there should be some form of sanctuary cities, there should be more welcome culture, there should be democracy, human rights. So it's a totally different discourse. And that comes from grassroots organizations. They are often pro-migration. And yeah, diversity is now seen as an enrichment, not only a financial thing, asset to have. So that is very interesting, because what comes together here is that black box. And I would claim that it's pretty much beyond scales and levels. So political scientists love to think of levels, multi-level governance. And I would agree that is important, but what has become much more important are those linkages. And we know that geographers always try to bring that into the academic discourse also. So go beyond the scales and the levels, see what are the new alliances and what are shared experiences. And so I come to the last part of my presentation, because I want 5 minutes. Really? Okay. I want to show you, then I will be quick, what mayors, who are these galleon figures, have said when we asked them about migration to the country. I'm very quick now. So the country of Brandenburg. Which dynamics do we look at? Brandenburg is surrounding Berlin. It's a place where the migration crisis, so to say, was, so that was that the refugees have been distributed to all of the cities in Germany, all across Germany. So also these cities, which you can see, which after reunification had very, very low numbers of foreigners, less than 1% often, they had to receive migrants now. That's interesting. And you can see also that graph here, how foreigners, how migrants came to that smaller cities in Brandenburg. And yeah, I'll be very quick. You can see that clearly here. And the research was, we were asking 8 mayors, so we were focusing on 8 cities, small cities in Brandenburg. We were asking them what the role was for local governance, their role for local governance. How did the mayors relate to the civil society, and how was the relationship between the resident population and the newcomers? So we did that in the middle of Corona, so it was somehow difficult to do that, but we could. And here you see Brandenburg, you see the big green dot in the middle, that's Berlin, many foreigners, and you see that, okay, this is surrounding Brandenburg. I have to be really quick. I come up with the main results here. So what are the findings beyond scales and levels? So the reactions of the arrival of migrants made visible underlying currents of social change, demographic transformation, peripherization, fear of the globalized society. The mayors have become what I call here global bureaucrats. Global bureaucrats. The involvement of civil society actors have helped to navigate in a fragmented field without clear responsibilities. We have a former migration experience, which was important, which allowed for civil engagement and more openness. We had social media coming up in that time, and that worked as a fire accelerator for populist movements we see today, which are spreading fastly. And we saw that the presence of educational institutions in 2 cities, universities, small universities, worked as an antidote for populism. And we have another interesting fact, which is that a new strata of academic actors educated in the migration-related fields flowed into the into the public administration, and that made a difference. I will quickly go to the quotes. I hope you give me another 5 minutes because we were so scrambled with that.
Ce qui va arriver pour tout le monde, c'est qu'on va rester jusqu'à 1h10. Comme ça, on a 10
Oui,
minutes de
c'est
plus.
bon, parce que c'était tragique.
Pose notre-
C'était tragique. No, so really, I want to read that quotes to you to show you what I mean. So what were the mayors saying? They were totally surprised by that arrival of the refugees. That really happened. So what did they say? We've been telling, so this demographic change, so this whole population in that mid and small and mid-sized towns was very old. I have to say so. And there was already this demographic change going on, peripherization, I would say. So the fear of the globalized society, you can notice that in the interviews. So one of the mayors said, we've been telling people for years that we are not an immigration country. Nobody has to come here. We don't want that. We shut ourselves off and so on. And suddenly, overnight, so to speak, now 1 million people are coming here. I believe that politicians have to ask themselves to some extent whether they have not made a mistake in the run up to this and will have problems with this situation of being an immigration country. So this is interesting because it blames the responsibility in a way to the politicians who had not communicated well enough to them that the rest of the country was populated by many immigrants. Yeah, interesting. But that's what they said. And then next point, what do I mean by the local bureaucrats? So the mayor said, and they did that in a very good way, I have to say. So they were all active and standing there and doing their job. We had, out of 8 mayors, we had only 1 female mayor, I have to say. So that is the reality in these counties. They had to adjust their relationship with formal regulations of the county. So that was often not clear. They had to speak to the administration. They had to refer to the informal practices of the civil society, and they had to react to the people coming there. So they had to explain that those people now came to those smaller cities, and they had to explain to the refugees that they were not responsible to issue visas, for example. So they said, and this is a wonderful quote, I feel like a mixture of Putin and an American sheriff. So, so this understanding of the mayor as being the king of, being the person in charge to give visas and to do everything. So, next point. So this, the involvement of civil society actors helped to navigate in a fragmented field without clear responsibilities, which is the characteristic of a crisis, maybe. So see that quote, you can think of the volunteers for pulling the chestnuts out of the fire, so that's the German saying. So you get your hands a bit too burnt, because the state support came much later. So saying this, the mayors acted outside of their competences. They didn't know when the money will arrive, if the money will arrive, and they were a bit lost in the multi-level governance. So they missed clear instructions how to navigate the new situation, which nobody could tell them, of course. And that is an interesting point on the farmer migration experiences. What do we mean here? What do I mean? Listen to that one. I think an important point is that the population in these parts of the former GDR never experienced really what Weltoffenheit is, so openness to the world, is that could allow yourself to go outside and see other realities. I think that people that have been socialized under this regime never understood what it means. So if you see the rather old population, it's a totally different generation of people, and they had to react now. I come to the social media, which came up in that time, really 2015-16. And that was important because so that person saying, the mass distribution of social media, such as Facebook, which had probably already been much too widespread by Facebook before, came in handy at that time of the wave of migration. It has, of course, suddenly provided an outlet for all kinds of statements that would never have been made in Germany before. But suddenly they made it legitimate to express things in a way that would have led to criminal proceeding 3 years earlier. And the mayor said they couldn't understand what was fake news. The word deep fake was not existing then when we did the interviews, but they couldn't understand what they were hearing. And all conflicts came up in the guises of migration. I'm quick here. Educational institutions were very important because then the mayors felt they had a backup by the civil society. But one of the most important changes is this last one, I think. So also smaller towns now had to put up integration offices. And some of our interview partners spoke of a petrified administrative structure. So there was something new coming here, and the new persons came with the knowledge. For example, that person, I'm born in Berlin, I grew up in Brandenburg, and I have studied in Berlin and Frankfurt-Oder, which is a place nearby, intercultural studies. I took up this job here, which did not exist before, and I make use of what I studied in my master's. And this is why I'm here. And this is really a social change we see going on in the administration. I come to my last slide, almost in time. So what do we see? I see that migration societies such as Canada and Germany find themselves in the middle of a societal and urban transformation, which is driven and led by migration and mobility. What we have seen about when we go back to the first part, the scrambled part of my presentation here, we can see that we have a relatively speedy integration of the Ukrainian refugees into the housing markets, but rather slow integration into the labor market, which might be connected to the German social welfare system, which provides first language and integration courses, and then we now hope that people will get into the labor market soon. I would say that the in-migration of thousands of Syrian refugees, over 1 million in that years, 2015 to 16, has prepared some of the existing migration infrastructure today. So all the municipalities were able to move quicker. The mayors can be called local bureaucrats, as they have to respond to various stakeholders on different, I would say, levels. And I think also that Germany's migration governance has proved to be resilient. If we see resilient, as OECD would suggest, as capacity to withstand, respond, adapt, and recover on that crisis. And I mean, that's my main point. We need to think about these new alliances, the crisscross governance, I would call it rather, initiatives for welcome culture, transnational partnerships between cities, diaspora formations, if we speak about migration as a driving force. And that's it. Merci beaucoup. Vielen Dank for your attention. I'm very pleased. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Felicitas Hillmann, pour cette fascinante présentation qui a connecté beaucoup de développement contemporain avec des trucs de théorie vraiment utiles, en fait, de sociologie, d'anthropologie, au-delà de la science politique, pour nous faire comprendre ces choses. Et on a maintenant à peu près 10 minutes pour vos questions. Donc, comme Elora l'écrivait dans la fonction webinaire, vous pouvez poser vos questions dans le chat et on relaie. Si vous les posez en français, on peut les traduire en anglais, il n'y a pas de problème. Donc, je vais regarder. Et puis, sinon, bien sûr, si je n'en vois pas dans le chat, on va poser des questions dans la salle. OK, so don't hesitate to ask your questions in French or English. And or in German. Or in German.
Also Italian.
Italian too.
Okay, thank you for your talk. It was very interesting. So I'm interested in hearing more about your comparison of the 2016 migration and the Ukrainian flow here, because you said like cities were better prepared.
Yeah.
But could you speak more to this and the differences perhaps in the reception as well by local communities?
Yeah, it's a good point because it's very difficult to compare the two really. Because when we look on the Syrian migration or in migration, you had mainly men coming. So we have a sexist argument in the whole discourse. And you have a racist argument in the whole discourse because the Ukrainians are not visible minorities. And I think it makes a big difference. So you have that. And then you also have, I mean, the Ukrainians are some sort of European neighboring state, and this war was a shock to everybody. And I think it makes a difference in how people welcome others. And it's in terms of numbers, it's different. So the whole comparison is maybe not working also because we had, if things happen one after the other, you cannot imagine a situation without the other. I mean, of course, the institutional system was somewhat trained now by Syrian refugees and could react very fastly. And Germany has a very capillary system of support for migrants, and that could be activated quickly. And what you have is always underestimated. If we would not have had that, things would have been very different. So it's difficult to compare the situations, but I think the main point is about racism and sexism in the whole discourse. And then another thing, the educational background is so different for the two groups. So you have the parts of the Syrian immigration. You had really people who were not able to read an alphabet. People you had many, and you had to learn first the Latin alphabet. I would think that's not been the case for the Ukrainians. I think that's different. So it's an educational point also here, and also the legal framework was much better for the Ukrainians, of course, because they had immediately access to everything, while the Syrian refugees had to wait for long until it was clear how they could live. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Alors, est-ce que vous avez encore une opportunité peut-être pour prendre une question du chat? Si quelqu'un a une question à poser en ligne, on va attendre une seconde.
C'est pas dans le Q&A.
Ouais. Mais là, il n'y a pas de question ouverte. C'est ça. Est-ce que dans la salle, nous avons une question? Ah oui.
Felicitas, one of the main concerns of Ukrainians here that arrived as displaced after the beginning of the full-scale invasion is regarding temporariness, and you were evoking that when they come to Canada, it's usually, well, in all my interviews with Ukrainians, it's to stay. Almost all of them want to stay, and they're very concerned about the temporariness of the statute. So you have you have a 3 years work permit with the QIT program. What about in Germany? You said you have 1 year plus another one, but the war is not over. So the Canadian government so far made that clear that it's a 3-year work permit, and then you have to get permanent residence if you want to stay in Canada. So we don't know what's going to happen after. So in Germany, what is, like, maybe you know the political discourse, what is it oriented towards, well, the war is not over and we will add another year or not? And then how do your mayors as local bureaucrats see them, the refugees, as not the refugees, displaced. I mean, they're in a situation of refugee, but they're really displaced. So how do they see like the integration of Ukrainian in a long-term perspective in their city, or not? That's a hard question.
Yeah, hard questions. I mean, we have we need workers. We need skilled workers in Germany, and in the same situation in Canada, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was not speaking to the mayors about the Ukrainians because we were speaking only about the Syrians. So I can't tell you. But what I can say is that some of the municipalities already said, oh, we have too many refugees now. We cannot cope with it any longer. Because of course, there were also refugees from all sorts of countries coming into Germany. And yeah, it was not only the Ukrainians, also the other refugee flows went on. So it's somewhat a mixed thing here.
Yeah.
About the temporality, yeah, we depend on European law, of course, and we have to see what's coming up then. It's been a solution for now, but I think nobody can think, nobody knows in this moment, so it's just another year. And then it depends very much if the people want to stay. And what we can see in the moment is, I had a graph on that, but I didn't bring it here. It says that people increasingly think about staying in Germany. In the beginning, they didn't thought about it. And they said, well, we want to go back, but slowly, the longer they stay, the likelier they are to say we want to stay, which is natural. I think it's human behavior. I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot tell you really. And yeah, but I think retainment of migrants is a big issue also in Canada. So how to bring in people, but also how to keep them here. And then you have to offer something. And yeah.
I see that. Thank you very much. We have one question in the Q&A, so I'm just going to look. And so Hiroki, who is actually a guest scholar here at the chair, so I'm just going to ask this question and we're going to finish on this, even though this is really a long question, but that's going to require a very quick answer. And he says, thank you very much for the wonderful and insightful presentation. I'm interested in knowing how Meyer's political values, such as liberal versus conservative, possibly make a difference in your findings. That's a good question.
Very good question. Frankly, I can't answer it because we had this 8 mayors, which is already a very small sample. And we decided, and they were of all colors, I have to say. They were of the Linke, so the leftist party. They were partly also of the Conservative Party, but they were all, I mean, what they all had in common was that they were seeking to find very pragmatic policies for them. And in that, they were really great. And there was not so much discussion about that. And they were trying to avoid concentration. So in the housing market, for example, some cities had the possibility to come up with housing which was run by the municipality itself, and they were well off because they had a solution at hand. But everybody was looking for an integration of those people into the texture. So I couldn't see any difference because when people had to act, they were all saying we want to get rid of this right-wing stuff and aggressions, but they knew also these people here have to vote for me afterwards. So it was a very double standard they had there in the way. But I think I was really impressed of those mayors, how they acted and how they took things into their hands to come up with something. I don't think there was a big difference in their, how to say that,
partisanship.
Yeah.
This is super interesting because we did research on that. I'll talk to you about this later when it's finished, but sometimes political values don't make such a difference in the service that you provide to a city.
No, I was really impressed by that, I have to say.
Well, on that hopeful note, on a besoin de terminer parce qu'il est l'heure et qu'on est un petit peu en retard. Donc, on vous remercie beaucoup. Donc, moi, je me suis d'ailleurs pas présentée, Adèle Garnier, au département de géographie. On vous remercie beaucoup avec Daniel Bélanger au nom de la chaire de recherche du Canada sur les dynamiques migratoires mondiales et de l'ÉRIQA. Et suivez-nous, et on remercie beaucoup Felicitas Hillmann pour cette très belle présentation qui est enregistrée, donc on espère qu'on pourra sortir les difficultés techniques. Suivez-nous sur nos médias sociaux que vous avez vus au début sur le slide sur Internet, Facebook et Twitter et nos sites. Et puis, on vous dit à la prochaine pour une autre rencontre. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.